Most companies don't have a revenue problem. They have a structural integrity problem. I'm David Figueroa, president of Primetime Systems. This is the Revenue Integrity Gap, where executive leaders get honest about what's actually breaking underneath the growth. Let's get into it. So welcome back to the Revenue Integrity Gap. I'm David Figueroa. Today's episode should resonate with many founders, CEOs, or leaders who are currently experiencing challenge around scale. And in today's day and age, there are many businesses that are encouraged to grow because technology and the new era of AI have influenced so much that we can do. And so today, I'm joined by Geoff Toffetti, and he's come here today with a lot of great insights. And I believe that there's substance about what we're about to converse about today to give executives conversations around what some people talk about. A lot of leaders talk about growth and scale, but Geoff has actually lived through it. Scaling multiple businesses through many stages through their cycle and looking at operating models and seeing the shift in operating models and how sometimes scale has the weight where their operating model breaks. So Geoff, I'd like to introduce you, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to introduce us who you are.
Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Geoff Toffetti. I am currently CEO of Frontline Performance Group. As mentioned, I've been a party to a couple of different companies that both went from either startup or very small to being multi-$100 million enterprises in completely different arenas and with completely different customer bases. In one case, they were blue chip Fortune 5000s, and in this case, they're more independent small businesses. I've just been through every kind of growth, whether it be through acquisition, organic growth, new product launch, new market development, new channel development. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about what you think is going to resonate most with people. Obviously, there's some new forces and dynamics in the market with AI and automation capabilities, although I wouldn't say they're fully realized yet, but we're getting there, and it's going to start getting really weird pretty soon. So how are we dealing with it as a business? What are we seeing from our customers?
Geoff, I'd like to kind of pull on the thread. Having been part of scaling businesses throughout your career, from your experience, have you ever seen a key inflection point where a problem or a key inflection point in the growth emerges?
Two in particular, both of which were catastrophic in their own right. Actually, maybe three when I think about it. But the first one, when I joined the company that I was with before this, we were a very early web native startup that wasn't a tech company. In 2000 or late 99, early 2000, we had developed a web-based operating platform, which was very cutting edge at the time. And we had a cool .com name and everything was edgy. And then the bubble burst and left us basically saying, did we just spend a year developing? It was an inflection point that forced us to pivot backwards in our operating model, but we did have a web native platform, which was completely new. So we had to adopt a very traditional staffing model, because this was in the staffing industry, to a fully integrated back office. So we made it our strength. And the other was in the same company, was in 2008. We all know what happened there. And again, we had to shift. We shifted the company from pure services and BPO, business process outsourcing, to tech. About 50% of the revenue got shifted to a tech model emerging from that.
Wow.
Which allowed us to preserve our enterprise value, even though growth had slowed dramatically. And then again, here, we had developed some technology tools, but we were not a tech-forward company. We were tech-enabled until COVID, and we lost upward of 90% of our revenue in March of 2020, and we faced death, and the only way out was to pivot to technology again. And luckily, knock on wood, we had developed enough technology to be able to shift to a product company rather than a services company, and survived, and now are kind of thriving once again. But all three of those were the kind of things that build your armor with, because they're so harrowing and they're so challenging. And the things you start to long for, the simple problems like an upset customer or a bad product release, when you're dealing with existential threat to the survival of the company.
Yeah, you're actually describing a very significant operating model shift, in fact. And from what I've heard, actually, from what you said, seems like a not just a lift, but a lift and shift of the operating model where it's transformed. Looked at your technology and your delivery mechanisms. You looked at who you're serving and how you're serving in order to operate backwards and then go back forward. But I wonder, did you do that with your same teams? Did you do that with your same processes? Did you have to reinvent workflows? Walk me through what that means when you unpack that, because a lift and shift of that significance, especially the last one, where you had a massive attrition rate, you basically had to lift the entire business and change the entire paradigm of your delivery and your approach and your marketing, you name it. So that's a really interesting topic to unpack.
Yeah, it was yes on basically all the fronts you mentioned. We had spent a decade prior to COVID cementing our culture, not only because it was trendy at the time to be into employee engagement, we fundamentally believe it. And all of the senior leaders, while we're not perfect, tried to foster a culture that had tolerance for change built in it, that people had each other's backs. So when we went into COVID, it was catastrophic because we couldn't keep everyone. We held on as long as we could. We took all of the money that we could and we gave it all to the employees, and eventually we had to downsize. When we downsized, we did it based on merit. We kept the best of the best, and that group we brought into the fold on all of our decision making. So we cut the company in half, basically, from a headcount standpoint. But then we started having regular all hands calls where we were just going through everything that we were doing. And I actually took a lesson from General McChrystal, who wrote the book about taking over JSOC during the Al-Qaeda conflict in Iraq, and how he had a call every day with 7,000 people on it and said, we're no longer siloed. We're going to tell everyone everything. And they tried to court-martial him, and he was like, court-martial me, I don't care. We're sharing all the information. So I kind of took a play out of that book and said, we're just going to tell everyone everything and let them share some of the stress that we're under, their ideas. And then we asked everyone to get on board with the change. We used to send consultants to our client locations, and they would work there in person. And we were saying we can't, so we're going to ask you to support them digitally. And let's come up with the mechanisms. You talk about workflows. We had to re-engineer every single thing that we did. We had to digitize all of our training. So we took all of these training seminars and workshops we'd been doing for years and reproduced them on camera. So it was just top to bottom wholesale change. And we divided it up where certain senior leaders would take certain componentry and they would lead that process, but we would always be coming back together and talking. Like I remember we were re-engineering our client onboarding. We were having 2 to 3 calls a week, 4 hours per call, people all over the world contributing and debating and arguing. And we finally got to a point where I remember being on the call. I was in the car and we were on the call and we finally had the workflow. And I went around the call, it was like 15 people on the call, and I went name by name and said, do you concur? Do you concur? Last iteration, and we're going to print on this. What it was just over and over again because we're launching new products and things. But in the prior circumstance with the other company, it wasn't as open a culture, which was part of the reason why when I came to Frontline, I knew that operating in a siloed culture makes it very hard to pivot. And where in that company, to be fair, we had an adversarial culture, and that was fostered from the top down. Executives to fighting. And it was because the leader had come out of the old school Ameritech, AT&T, GE, and they were very adversarial cultures when it came to leadership. And our founder, we agreed we didn't want to have that kind of culture. We wanted to have a culture we could be honest with each other, we could forgive each other when mistakes happen. Like during COVID, all the senior executives took more than 50% pay cuts for 2 years, and we lost no one. There was no attrition, no defections, because we had spent a decade on it. It was almost like divine intervention that we were ready for that to happen. But pivoting at that scale, just an all hands, all communication, full transparency initiative, or you're going to run into these choke points that will frustrate the business and you won't be able to progress.
Transparency is a powerful mechanism, isn't it? Powerful. And I think buy-in, you said a lot of things there around buy-in, transparency, communication, alignment, right? I love what you said around taking whatever the objective is and the plan and going around the room and saying, do you agree? Do you agree? Are we in consensus? Well, there's going to be a minority that don't agree, but that means we have things that we have to work on. But the majority agrees, then it means that collectively we're doing the right thing, which is a true testament to you and your team's dedication to the culture. And it's really an ethical approach to how you run your business, because you can't leave folks behind if you want to get on the train and keep it on the tracks, right? They'll be sitting at the station, and then all of a sudden you figure out, hey,
No one's watching the brakes.
yeah, in that seat over there.
Exactly.
Exactly. And it brings me to a reflection point in my past where we were in a situation where the operating model wasn't moving as fast as our customers were. And in introspection as a leader, you start to think about, well, what needs to change and what needs to be true to meet these expectations? If not, we're going to suffer X amount of attrition relating to our recurring revenue, ARR, MRR. What needs to be true? And we're being challenged to do something different. And you start to look across the business and the operating model, and you're like, golly, that is huge, right? You're talking about people and talent and technology and processes and workflows. And oh man, this is an overhaul. Geoff, you've done it with success, by the way, because you can do it and expect a lot of outcomes.
Yeah, expecting
and not
success
always
isn't one of
get
them.
there. Something you said that really resonated with me, and I'd love to explore, is your senior leadership team, because it does start at the top. Having adopted a business with, let's just call it toxic type of culture that allowed for some not very conducive to success behaviors like silos, right? Like lack of transparency, like not bringing your employees along or having extended leadership into conversations that are strategy and relating to their functional areas. Have you ever been in a situation seeing leaders where themselves, they are the bottleneck?
There's an old adage, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard, that the people that got you here won't necessarily be the ones who get you there. Unfortunately, that is true in some circumstances. There's two ways that I tend to see leaders becoming their own bottleneck. One is that whatever their skill set was that helped you in the beginning is not the skill set you need going forward, and they're not learning fast enough. One of my personal ethos is you have to be a continuous learner, a forever learner, and you have to be studying what's new and reading all the time. They want to rest on what they did in the past, but things have changed, and that sometimes becomes their main blind spot, and you can't get them to move past it. And that still happens today. We still have people that, we're cajoling them, we're pulling them, we're kicking them, we're hugging them, we're trying to get them moving in the right direction. And sometimes they have their own gaps that they can't overcome. And then the other, I think, is the pride of authorship side blockage, where you're asking someone to change their viewpoint or the way that they operate, and they built the prior way, and they don't want to abandon it to do something new. So those two things can become insurmountable in some cases, and in some cases people do have to leave the organization. But those are the two most common, is it's either like human pride or a lack of personal responsibility on your development. I don't care if you're the CFO or the CEO or you're the admin. If you're not constantly striving for new knowledge, and it doesn't have to be like reading philosophy, that would be great, but learning your customers. What are your customers up to? What are their strategic plans? Has anyone watched the analyst reports of your biggest customers and see what they're saying? Many ways to achieve new knowledge, but that's where I find that the bottlenecks occur. I find myself in a conversation with someone and I'm like, I feel like we're talking in the past. We're not talking in the future, and we need to get up. Now, we're very fortunate in our company right now. We don't have any of that. I can honestly say we don't have anyone that has dug their heels into something like that. Everyone wants to win. We've brought our entire management team into the equity fold, all aligned. We all have long-term incentives. But in my prior world, it was an arm wrestling match to get anything done because everyone was trying to shine, and it was set up so that in order for me to shine, you had to not shine. Very
Burning one's candle out to make another brighter.
correct. That's exactly right. And that is devastating to trying to grow an enterprise where you have leaders who overlap, even just 10% overlap. That overlap
Right.
becomes a battle zone. And we intentionally rooted that out and have not gone after that.
Being cognizant of what behaviors are correctly aligned to the culture and the strategy, the vision, the mission, and having the right behaviors. Now we're human, right? So there's going to be some debt and some luggage that you're carrying, whatever that may be. But so as long as when you show up every day, that your behaviors align to the strategy, our values, and our mission, and then of course with our culture, I think those are the things you're leaning into. I start to think tactically, and I go back into the recesses of my memory and think back to times where I remember co-leaders just running away. I probably would say creating busy work, like the calendar. There was never white space on the calendar to discuss a very important topic that had to do with one, your budget, two, your functional area, and three, maybe a couple of your resources that would make you have to think about very difficult decisions. And they would just avoid it because there was zero white space in your calendar. And then, of course, you get into an SLT meeting and there's so many other objectives on that agenda, you know. This episode is brought to you by Frontline Performance Group. Frontline Performance Group turns every guest interaction into a smarter revenue opportunity. For more than 30 years, FPG has helped leading hotel brands transform frontline operations into measurable commercial growth. Today, more than 2,500 hotels across 120 countries use FPG's technology, training, and performance systems to improve guest engagement, strengthen employee performance, and generate millions in incremental revenue. From its Engage platform to new AI-powered pre-arrival solutions, FPG helps hotels better understand guest behavior, personalize offers, optimize pricing, and drive stronger RevPAR and TrevPAR performance across the entire guest journey. Learn how your property can elevate service and grow top-line revenue at frontlinepg.com. I think today technology has moved. Today you put a 10K in there, you can put whatever you want, annual report, you could put whatever you want into there. And as long as that the FAQ or whatever you created with the LLM understands what you're trying to accomplish, your knowledge base, then you can reconcile the two and have a little bit of direction. Although I will say that it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say I have a high degree of believability in all of the some, but for the most part, you get direction. And I wonder that when I think about, let's just think about the calendar, right? Because you were talking about very good concepts, strong concepts, behavior, cultural alignment. If I go down another level, and please, you can get into granularity probably a lot better than I can. But when we think about what's broken or how it broke, and how do we assess what needs to be fixed, and let's just use calendar as an example. How do we figure out mechanics that are specific around these complexities and around how that distorts decision making? So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic that you're raising because it can be daunting in its complexity to try and comprehend. So we're going through something intentional right now where we are trying to deploy automation tools in a way that is non-disruptive to the business, but we get some immediate value out of. So we picked people in the company that are closest to the problem, but also aren't necessarily technical, because we wanted people that are actually living the current reality. So we put together a committee. We appointed what I called an automation czar, who was a sort of a utility executive in the company that had very high technical acumen. And I said, the first thing we need to do is figure out what we can do. I don't want pie in the sky. I don't want questions about Could it
Yes.
possibly, what I wanted
Right.
the committee to do was come up with a list of things that are tangible, measurable, and will have direct and immediate impact on our capacity planning. And so they came up with a few. To their credit, they estimate it could be as much as 20% of the labor of our client support teams. That 20% allows a lot of scale and a lot of breathing room to do the next 20%. Stuck. They're like stuck in a wedge. And you ask them to take on a task, and they're like, the only thing they can move is their finger, right? And so I wanted to loosen it up, free them up a little. So we committee came up with some very practical. I said, think of the most boring, mundane, repetitive, administrative stuff that's going on in the business. And let's dig in there. Let's not think about all these other things that, yes, we can get to that. But I think a lot of times what happens is people look at the big picture of like a complete overhaul, and it's just too big. And so it's easier to just not touch it, right?
Totally.
Break it down in little
Love.
pieces, assign some leaders that are pragmatic and tactical, and say, give them an objective. Like once they come up with the list, then it's like, okay, well, let's create a goal. Let's say it's 20% labor efficiency to revenue. Let's put that out for like a certain amount of time, and let's work toward that, because then we can measure it. Like the first measurement matrix that was provided to me in this initiative was like 14 variables. And I said, no, nothing's going to happen if it's that complicated. I said, let's just make it how our labor cost as a factor of revenue. It should reflect efficiency. Let's put a goal out there and move the needle. And then you can start to get everyone on board. Because the other thing is, while we have a very flexible culture, I would stack my culture up against any company in the world, to be honest with you. But it has its limits. You ask for too much change too fast, people, it gets very uncomfortable. They become inefficient. So we're trying to just take measured steps and give everyone a chance to breathe and give them a chance to have an opinion as it's rolling out. But it is probably the hardest thing. You have to be ambitious and also be pragmatic.
Yeah, I love what you're doing by taking the macro to the micro, and it actually very pragmatic, right? It's almost an experiment and formulating a committee, having someone accountable. You call them the czar, but you're saying, hey, I need a social security number that's going to make sure that this project is going to move, and let's talk about it. And we'll have a cadence around communication, and we'll gauge what it is before we execute, and then let's just break it down and then flow it up, which is almost like business decision flow, right? Where we're trying to bring it back down. Let's dissect the strategy. Let's dissect the problems within the business, dissect where it's at, and let's put it in pieces, and then let's bring it back up.
Correct.
And then us as a leadership team collectively can make a decision on that flow. I spoke about the calendar because sometimes that's frustrating, because you've got, to your point, you guys did it right. You put a social security number on this initiative and said, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of time with X amount of dollars and these amount of resources. You appoint your team, and then let's figure how we're going to dissect this. But if it sits on your leader, that has to own it. And let's just say it's not organizational, it's particularly around the revenue engine, right? That's our stuff over
Correct.
here, right? It's in your revenue engine, which touches 2 or 3 departments. Now we're talking about, well, department B, it's been sitting in your queue on your desk. I get it. You're juggling a lot of balls at once, but this is an important one. How do we unlodge that?
Yeah, and that was
Right?
we had something we wanted to achieve. It's very specific. It's very clearly defined, but it is predicated on people having capacity to change. Because if you're going to change, that means you're going to take on more in the short term, because you're going to be doing two things at the same time. And so I said, put on the brakes. We're going to create capacity. That was issue number one. So if it had been purely a technical thing, we could have done it in a silo and then rolled it out like a product. But this was core to the business, exactly what you're describing. We wanted to change some behavior of the business that required our people to do something different. They can't do anything different if they can't move, if they're stuck in the mud. So we had to create capacity, and that's why I brought it back to something tangible and said, let's take the most monotonous, repetitive stuff that people do every day and automate it. And that way they'll buy in, because they'll say, okay, you took 5 hours of my work away. Now I can give you that 5 hours and be free in my thinking and not in the quagmire of work. And I think a lot of people will. The promise of AI that most excites me is that all of the labor that is consumed doing things that anyone could do theoretically can now be done technically or very soon be automated at a very low cost, which is like a real net gain to productivity, which Elon's been talking about. The productivity measure, the GDP is going to go 4x or whatever. This is what he's talking about, is you can increase productivity without increasing labor cost. And that does two things. It allows your labor to do something more interesting, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make them more strategic. The other is it might give them an opportunity to earn more money because you can share the savings with them. Those are two things that have not really been, maybe since the internet rolled out, it hasn't been realistic that you could do that.
Yep.
So that's what excites me, and I think that's what's exciting our team, is that we're not asking them to automate. We're automating to give them freedom to do more of what we want them to do, which we think is more strategically valuable.
Totally agree. In fact, not only Prime's business, but just around the discussions from leaders in the revenue integrity gap, this conversation is actually at the core thesis of what we're trying to unravel, because I will agree and also challenge that. And I'll tell you how and why. We're going to try to keep what we're doing and eliminate mundane, tedious tasks that are administrative in their nature, that are consuming time where you can go spend more time doing other things that are more beneficial to not only you for work-life balance, but to the organization in terms of our growth. Now, where I challenge that is when we start to think about the operating model and what we're trying to discover in terms of being a leader and having some leaders that carry some luggage and sometimes they're inundated, the signals is what we're looking for, right? When we start to look at our business and we're trying to find signals of things that need to be addressed, whether they're change up, down, sideways, left, right, but we're looking for these signals, and then we create, like once we have a diagnosis, we create a strategy, and then we go and deploy. The problem with automation is that there's signals all over the place, right? So the question that happens that I'd love to explore with you is this signal visibility. At times it's hidden. You can't see it because it lives 3 levels under the person that is responsible for reporting it, and then they report it up and something looks weird, but you can't really see the signal because it's buried in their workflow, right? But when you do get that signal and you say, all right, we're going to act, you start the initiative group, right? The committee, like a SIG actually, and they go out and say, all right, we're going to go and do this. How do you, when you fix all these signals, you see them, you start to operate, you start to audit, where's the governance? How do we bring them together? How do we start feeling like change is not just happening at the execution level, but how does it move at the operational level and the organizational level where there's a slower but larger revolution?
Yeah, that is a fascinating way to put it, because your gearing ratios is a good analogy for how it actually goes. I think the reason that, in my particular perspective, the reason I started with very tangible, very tactical, highly repeated challenges is that it's going to go horizontal quickly. Because I'll just give a real example. If you wanted to automate an email response that is a repetitive email response that AI is fully capable of handling, let's say a password reset email, or a customer asking a question like, how do I reset my password? If you narrow it to a few of those that are highly recurring, you're not going to meet resistance from the team because they hate answering them. They're going to give you the time to figure it out, and you're going to get an immediate measurable benefit. Because if it's something more complicated where there's multiple decision points in a workflow and you're trying to automate all those, that's why smaller, mid-sized companies, even big companies, are struggling to deploy AI tools, is because you're realizing that that pipeline can be very complicated. And if you don't have all the right research in place and all the right available data, you're going to have all these defects and hallucinations and all kinds of stuff. Let's do what the AI is really good at, and let's deploy that against very specific chunks of work. The 10,000 RPM thing, it's very easy, repeatable, measurable, and transparent. From a signal standpoint, we looked and we just said, what are our people doing all the time that adds like no real value? It just has to be done, but it's not value add. And we started there. When you move
Smart.
upstream, so one of the signals that we were being responsive to in undertaking a lot of this now is retention. So we're getting bigger. Growth is harder to maintain the bigger you get. It's a percentage. And so we just said, we have pretty good retention. It's above 90%, but we're like, you shave a few points off of that. It makes a real big difference on your growth aspirations.
Yeah.
And where we realized we need our people to be more strategic, and we know exactly where. If I want you to do a new thing, I need to give you space. And that brought this all together. So I said, okay, our strategic operational pivot is high level, and it's complicated, and it requires human beings. Machines can't do that. How do I make it so the human beings can do it? Because you can't be a new hire. I can't just go hire people and stick them in there. There's too much institutional knowledge required.
Exactly.
How do I automate? And so that's exactly how we got to this place. Is one is way down in the dirt, and the other's up here, not quite in the clouds, but at the top of the skyscraper, where it moves very slowly. And we're looking at like annual behaviors that are leading to annual retention.
Good.
So I love that whole gearing thing is a perfect analogy for this. And I think personally, this might just be me, but I know a fair amount of CEOs. Certainly I know a lot of senior executives. And I feel like a lot of the time, they don't spend enough time in the details. Now, you don't want to get mired in it because you got to be thinking broadly. But if you don't understand the work burden of your business and where you can pull levers, I see this happen a lot. People will make a strategy. We're going to do this, not realizing there's like 70 factors that are going to prevent you from doing that. So I try to stay close enough to it so I don't make cockamamie decisions like that. And then everyone comes back and they're like, we have to tell you that can't happen.
100%. 100%. Or even worse, they don't even tell you. Like, well, silence is complacency. We don't want that. You've got to say something. And then there's optics that come from that. Well, we're just going to do what the boss says. I'm like, hold on a second.
Yeah, we're going to break
This is a
everything just because the
democracy.
boss said so.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do it.
Right. Come back and tell me why it was a
let's think
stupid idea. And that's, that goes
Exactly.
back to culture. Are people, I loathe the idea, but the more senior you get, the more uncomfortable people are challenging you. I can remember feeling that way. I try very hard to make that so that's not part of our culture, but it's just human nature. So knowing that you have trusted people that will filter that up to you, even if you don't want to hear it, is critically important. And I do. I have people, I've given them permission to correct me if I'm doing something wrong or going down the wrong path. And they do. And that prevents you from doing all this work. You think it's in motion. You visit it next month and nothing's happened because people are just sitting on their hands.
100%.
Is worse, I think, than making bad decisions, because at least bad decisions create change.
And I'm a servant leader, so I resonate with that approach 100%. I always tell the folks that work with me is that I work for you, because without you, I can't do what I can't do. And without me, we have no direction. So we're working for each other, quite frankly.
I agree.
In the marketplace today with leaders, there's an innate reflex action to just go and solve the world's problems, your business, your organization, with AI, saying, hey, we're going to go and deploy all these pilots and co-pilots and you name it and try to solve it. Your pragmatic approach is actually the most sound one. I think that is the right way of doing it. Like, hey, this is like low friction. No one wants to scan a piece of paper into the Epsom anymore. All right. So let's get rid of scanning paper. Can we do that?
If I go back 20 plus years, startup company, I read a book called Re-Engineering the Corporation. It's a fairly old book at this point. I think it was written in the 90s. They came to me and they said, we need to do something different. We need to loosen things up. So I went and read the book, and we were a payroll and staffing company. I found two things that everyone hated doing that had to be done. One was stuffing envelopes. The second was scanning paperwork. And the third was binding them, because we had to put the things in binders at that time. So I went and found a check stuffing machine. It was like $4,000. And I went and watched and studied and said, oh, we're spending that much every month in labor. We got this amazing hole punch machine that could punch a ream of paper, which was incredible, because when you want to bind stuff, you're punching it 20 pages at a time. And then I brought in OCR for the first
commercial
time.
industrial one.
Yeah, I brought in OCR so that it scanned it, queued it, someone had to check it. But those three things gave us the breathing room to then say, okay, now we're going to re-engineer how we actually function as a business because everyone can breathe.
This episode is brought to you by Secure Show, the secure access buyer and property management platform built for the next era of real estate. For brokerages, property managers, and institutional owners, every showing now carries more risk, more compliance, and more operational complexity. Secure Show helps verify who is entering the property, confirm buyer readiness, document access requirements, and create a clean audit trail from showing to transaction. Identity, access, compliance, and transparency, all in one secure operating system. Learn how Secure Show is helping real estate leaders protect assets, qualify buyers, and modernize property access at www.secureshow.ai. Staying on the AI concept and thinking about the exploration into AI, once we start to deploy it, I'm not sure if you're there just yet, but just from your experience, what you understand in flirting with the new era of technology, do you think, or have you seen where AI is intended to bring together teams and align them, but in actuality, what it did was surface more problems?
I think that's a really big question, and I don't want to overstate my knowledge here, but I will say operationally, we're at the infancy of AI deployment, so we haven't run into that. But where I have is in our product. So we've brought AI into our product to provide insights, guidance to managers. And so if you think about like in a restaurant, we're analyzing all their data and we're providing them these AI insights, and the AI is surfacing things that the management teams in some cases have been blind to. A real easy one that AI is really good at, but managers are really bad at, and is creating some friction in comps, which could actually be more nefarious than that. And so we're having to be really careful what the AI is told to reveal, because it creates consternation in the operation of the company. The manager doesn't want their boss to know that they have 4% shrinkage when they should have 1%. But the AI is really good at finding it and who exactly is doing it and what it is that's happening. So we're providing these insights to our clients, and we're having to police them a bit because they're so honest. They're just totally brutally honest. If you ask it to find a pattern in whatever set of variables, it will. And so we didn't really think about the idea that it's going to say things to the client that maybe they don't want to hear yet. And I think that's where operationally things could start to get a little strange, is if you have AI agents in finance and you have AI agents in sales, and they're pattern checking and looking for opportunities, and they're pointing at each other. Ops and sales are usually at arms. But when the data patterns start to reveal it in like cold, harsh terms, I think it could start to become strange. And I think that management teams aren't quite ready for, when I say cold, I mean there's just no emotion. It's just, here's the fact, your team stinks. It's not performing. We have to be careful that we don't let the AI just tell everyone what's going on. It could undermine the culture because it's just not filtered.
Completely accurate, especially when, and sometimes the filter is inaccurate.
Yeah, of course.
Just using that example of comps and discounts, maybe that manager was comping because the property owner says, no, anybody that comes from you name it organization has this one, and they didn't have occupancy that night, and they just opened it up a little further and made a decision. For data leads me to a philosophical apex around AI for me when it comes to institutionalizing AI as a construct of how it's going to execute to provide a value. I think I'm super hyper organized around that. In fact, that's what we do, which It's around structure integrity and being able to understand that the LLMs are structured properly. But sometimes the organization is not moving as fast as the technology is wanting them to move and or the market is moving. And I think that finding that where all three are meeting at the same time, super hard.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's because I talk to a lot of mid-market people, leaders, and executives, and there is still an inherent fuzziness to the visualization of how AI can and will be deployed. Most people's perspectives, I think, are largely based on things they've seen either through someone who gave them a sales presentation or an employee who brought forth a solution. They're not yet at a point where they're visualizing their own solutions. And this is the biggest thing that I think myself and our CTO have that's beneficial for a company our size is we immersed ourselves in this when deep learning first hit the cultural ethos about 10 years
Right.
ago. And for 7 years, there was just no practical way to deploy it without building a huge tech team that had AI specialization, which is very expensive. So the LLMs have been a huge revolution for us because now we can start to deploy solutions. But I just had a session with a CEO of a company where I'm not officially mentoring them, but they asked me for my advice. So we had some calls. And they're a services company that's very inventory dependent. And they were trying to explain they had a couple of things they wanted to try and do. And I said, well, if with the current AI, this is not like pie in the sky. This is what I like to say. It's not Star Trek. This is like can be done today. If the person
Yes.
in the field is giving some feedback to the system can adjust your inventory ordering automatically, predictively, saying, okay, we're going to do a job 3 weeks from now. Oh, but you changed your mind. We're going to update the whole. That is well within its auspices to do. And then it could send a change order to the inventory team that puts it on the van. And these are all being done by people today. And that's what I just described as not a heavy lift conceptually. But even those kinds of things, I think the business leadership haven't yet gotten there. It's still a little fuzzy. How do you actually execute the AI system to do that? And there's not yet enough resource available to people to just make a call and say, hey, I want to automate my inventory adjustment system. You have to have institutional knowledge, you have to have AI knowledge, you have to have systems knowledge. I can see the day where you'll interact with an AI agent, almost like Claude Code, and you'll say, here are my systems, this is what I want to do, go figure out how to do it and come back and tell me. But that I think we're a couple years. So I would suggest you start with something small, bite-sized, have some success. Like I tell every CI I know, have you gone in Claude Code or Replit and written software? And if they say no, I'm like, how can you understand what the capabilities are if you haven't done it yet? Like just take one weekend and organize your baseball cards or your wine collection or build a piece of software and use AI to write it for you and you'll start to understand what it's really capable of.
I totally agree with you. 100%. I would also append that thought and saying, even if there are tools, tying them together is a super difficult challenge without investing in an MCP and then, like you just said, standing up an entire staff to hold accountable around the technology kind of binding itself to the business and helping the operating model versus dragging it. I think of that as governance. I am hard on governance. I kind of hit that drum constantly. In fact, like I say it in pretty much every episode of this podcast and the future podcast, I will say it, because I believe governance is more than ever necessary today because of the ability and the resources available to us today. It can easily get far away from us, and especially for those folks like you're saying that, like, hey, dude, you haven't even tested the water. Like, you don't even know if the water is cold, hot, warm. Like, at least approach the shore.
Right. Look break the surface of the water.
Yeah.
Because you're exactly right. Like what my CTO and I talk about a lot is governance is, you're 100% right. I gloss over that completely because I'm assuming that people know, but I shouldn't do that. And what excites me is that very soon we will have orchestrating agents that can provide governance under tight constraint that aren't tied to the underlying system so that they can flag the signals from deep inside the workflow early and say, like that ordering thing, all of a sudden the AI orders 4,000 of these stupid things because it's a good price. There's got to be gates, obviously.
Yeah.
And of the orchestration, we can get there, but again, it's just not off the shelf yet. It's still very custom work to integrate access to tools and governance, but it's progressing. It's at a point where even a small business could do a little bit of AI automation and not be in danger and have it within their own capabilities. That's what I think is most exciting. The change management and the operational flexibility of businesses over the next 3 to 5 years is going to be unprecedented. The companies that don't have leaders that get in the water are going to find themselves left behind by the people who jump in, because the acceleration of efficiency is going to be so fast that if you don't, you're going to wake up one day and your competitors are going to be operating at 3 times the efficiency. And you're going to be like, how did that
100%.
happen?
100%.
And so for leaders listening, if you're not out there dipping your toe in the water, please get in the water. It's nice.
I spoke at an event not long ago, a room full of executives, and I spoke specifically to a role in that room that's around revenue and revenue management and commercial practices. And I said, I believe today, the executive seller. Tomorrow, you need to be an engineer. Because I think tomorrow's roles in terms of leadership, you're going to have an element of engineering or technical understanding in order for you to operate. If not, you don't know what's true and you don't know what the North Star is going to look like or how to get there. So if you don't have technology wrapped up into your structural understanding of what needs to be true, then you're not going to be able to lead the team to get to the North Star.
Very well. I used to say this about myself. I never really was great at SQL, but I could read it. When I was talking to my DBAs or I was talking to my BI team, I could read their query and I could actually troubleshoot their queries because I knew what I wanted. Same kind of, if you don't speak AI at least a little bit, if you don't speak Claude at least a little bit, you're not going to be able to converse with your team. You're not going to be able to articulate to them what it is you want and then assess whether they've built it or not. I think it's a scary vision, but even midline managers are going to have engineering knowledge and be able to track what AI is doing, or else they're not going to be additive to a business. We're talking about white collar work, right?
Yeah.
But it's true.
Agreed.
I think people, if you're not equally comfortable managing AI as you are managing people, you're going to find yourself under a lot of pressure.
Geoff, as we wrap up, I wanted to end with something practical and a key takeaway from your experience that you could offer to our listeners. It's a big question. It doesn't have to be a massive statement, but I feel it has to be impactful. So I would ask you, what advice would you give to a CEO or founder who is scaling from 5, 20 to 100 million and beyond?
Read a lot. If you don't have time to read, listen, because I listen to books more than I read them, and balance your time between business, technology type books and things that stimulate you intellectually. Because as long as you're stimulating your mind, you're going to be creative. The other I would say is you have to give yourself time to think. Block time on your calendar where you are not obligated to speak to someone and be able to pick a problem and really think about it or explore an idea that you have. Those would be 2 big ones, because if you don't have those, you're not going to be in the frame of mind to lead through adversity. You have to be steady. You have to be the rock the business is leaning on. Get in the pool. The water's warm. The AI won't bite you. I like Replit because I started with Replit. It's very easy to use. It's natural language. And just go see what it can do. Build a website. Do something simple, because it will open your eyes and your mind to what the tools are at your disposal. And when you're sitting in a meeting and people are talking a bunch of nonsense, you're going to know that they don't know what they're talking about. And that's half the battle when you're trying to lead a mission, is you got the guys running behind you that are like, they're mission drivers, but there's people in the back that could be sabotaging the mission and you'll be unaware. So those would be my 3. I actually wrote a series of ethos statements for our business, 5 in cultural ethos and 5 operating ethos at the guardrails of the business. And I would encourage everyone to take a similar exercise, because you'll be surprised what you come up with and why you think that. And then when you can articulate it to your whole company, it helps just get everyone moving and give them a common language to speak.
Thanks, Geoff. I really appreciate the kind words, the experience, and the opportunity to have talked to you today. Thank you so much.
Likewise, it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the Revenue Integrity Gap. If this hits home, share it with one executive in your network who needs to hear it. That's how this show grows. This episode is brought to you by Prime Time Systems, where we help revenue organizations close the gap between growth and governed execution. Find out more at prime-timesystems.com. That's prime-timesystems.com. I'm David Figueroa. I'll see you next time.